Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The humid Manila air carried the familiar scent of street food and diesel fumes as Manny Pacquiao stepped out of his black sedan onto the polished marble entrance of the luxury hotel. His security detail, led by the ever-watchful Bayani, maintained a respectful distance while guests and staff turned their heads in recognition. After decades in the spotlight, Manny had grown accustomed to the attention, but tonight felt different. Tonight carried an anticipation he couldn't quite place. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks prior through his manager's office, a simple request for a private dinner meeting with Cristiano Ronaldo, who would be passing through the Philippines during his brief Asian tour. The Portuguese superstar had specifically requested that the gathering remain intimate, away from cameras and media attention. For two men whose lives were constantly documented, the promise of genuine privacy was more valuable than any championship belt or golden boot. As Manny rode the elevator to the penthouse suite, his mind wandered to the countless parallels between their journeys. Both had risen from humble beginnings to become global icons. Both carried the weight of their nations, expectations, and both understood the loneliness that often accompanied extraordinary success. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors opened to reveal a hallway adorned with fresh sampaguita flowers, a thoughtful Filipino touch that brought a smile to Manny's weathered face. Cristiano stood waiting at the suite's entrance, his familiar smile radiating the same warmth that had captivated millions worldwide. The embrace they shared transcended language barriers and cultural differences. It was the greeting of two warriors who recognized something profound in each other. The Portuguese star's eyes held a depth that cameras rarely captured, revealing the man behind the carefully crafted public persona. The penthouse suite had been transformed into an intimate setting that honored both their heritages. Portuguese fado music played softly in the background, while the dining table showcased a fusion of Mediterranean and Filipino cuisines prepared by chef Isagani, specially flown in from Cebu. But it was the small details that caught Manny's attention. Photographs from their respective childhoods, both featuring young boys with oversized dreams and undersized shoes, kicking balls on dusty streets thousands of miles apart. As they settled into comfortable chairs overlooking the glittering Manila skyline, Cristiano's demeanor shifted from the confident athlete the world knew to something more vulnerable, more human. He spoke about the pressure of constant performance, the weight of being a role model to millions, and the challenge of maintaining authenticity in a world that often demanded perfection. Manny found himself nodding in understanding, recognizing his own struggles in the Portuguese star's words. The conversation flowed naturally from their shared experiences in professional sports to their roles as fathers, from the sacrifices their families had made to the responsibility they felt toward their communities. Cristiano's eyes lit up when discussing his children's dreams and aspirations, while Manny shared stories about Jim Ewell's growing interest in basketball and Princess's academic achievements. As the evening progressed, the initial formality melted away, replaced by genuine connection and mutual respect. They discussed their philanthropic efforts, Cristiano's hospitals and schools in Portugal, Manny's housing projects and scholarship programs in Mindanao. Both men had discovered that true fulfillment came not from personal accolades, but from the positive impact they could have on others' lives. The night air grew cooler as they moved to the balcony, the city lights below reflecting the stars above. In the comfortable silence that followed their deep conversation, both athletes seemed to understand that this meeting represented something rare in their carefully orchestrated lives, an authentic moment of human connection between two souls who had traveled similar paths to extraordinary destinations. Neither man could have anticipated what was about to unfold, how this simple dinner would become a memory that would reshape Manny's perspective on friendship, legacy, and the unexpected gifts that life sometimes presents when we least expect them. The soft glow of Manila's city lights created an almost ethereal backdrop as the two global icons continued their conversation on the penthouse balcony. Cristiano's usually animated gestures had become more subdued, more contemplative, as if he were carefully weighing each moment of their exchange. Manny noticed the Portuguese star occasionally glancing toward a leather briefcase that sat discreetly beside his chair, a detail that hadn't escaped the Filipino boxer's trained observational skills. As the night deepened, their conversation naturally shifted toward the topic of legacy and the marks they hoped to leave beyond their athletic achievements. Cristiano spoke passionately about his dream of creating lasting change in impoverished communities, while Manny shared his vision of transforming General Santos City into a beacon of hope for underprivileged youth throughout the Philippines. The genuine emotion in both men's voices revealed the depth of their commitment to causes greater than themselves. The evening took an unexpected turn when Cristiano excused himself briefly, returning with the mysterious briefcase. His hands trembled slightly as he set it down on the small table between them, a display of vulnerability that seemed almost impossible from someone known for his unwavering confidence. The Portuguese superstar's eyes reflected a mixture of nervous excitement and profound respect as he looked at Manny, his voice barely above a whisper when he began to explain the significance of what he was about to reveal. Manny's curiosity piqued as Cristiano carefully opened the briefcase, revealing contents wrapped in pristine white cloth. The reverence with which the Portuguese star handled the package suggested something far more meaningful than any typical gift exchanged between celebrities. The fabric itself appeared aged, carrying with it an aura of history and significance that made the surrounding luxury suite feel almost sacred. As Cristiano began to unwrap the mysterious item, he shared a story that Manny had never heard before, a tale of how the Filipino boxer's journey from extreme poverty to global stardom had profoundly impacted Cristiano's own life during his most challenging moments. The Portuguese star revealed how, during his early struggles at Manchester United, when homesickness and self-doubt threatened to derail his dreams, he had discovered Manny's story through a documentary that changed his entire perspective on perseverance and determination. The emotional weight of Cristiano's revelation filled the space between them as he continued to carefully unveil the gift. He spoke about late nights in Manchester when he would watch footage of Manny's fights, not for the boxing technique, but for the pure heart and determination that radiated from the Filipino champion. Those moments had taught him that true strength came not from physical prowess alone, but from an unbreakable spirit forged through adversity. Manny felt his chest tighten with emotion as he began to understand the profound impact his journey had unknowingly had on another soul thousands of miles away. The realization that his struggles and triumphs had provided inspiration during someone else's darkest moments created a connection that transcended their already remarkable evening together. The final layer of wrapping fell away, and what Cristiano revealed left Manny completely speechless. The item that emerged from the protective cloth carried with it a story of dedication, research, and genuine admiration that had taken months of careful planning and coordination. The Portuguese star's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he witnessed Manny's initial reaction, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and overwhelming gratitude. The gift represented more than a simple gesture between two successful athletes. It embodied a bridge between their worlds, their struggles, and their shared understanding of what it meant to carry the hopes and dreams of millions. As Manny reached out with trembling hands to touch the precious item, he realized that this moment would forever change how he viewed friendship, influence, and the unexpected ways that lives could intersect across continents and cultures. The cool Manila breeze seemed to pause in anticipation of what would unfold next, as if even nature recognized the significance of this extraordinary exchange between two champions. The item that lay before Manny was a pair of worn leather boxing gloves, but not just any gloves. These were the exact pair he had worn during his very first amateur fight at age 12 in General Santos City, gloves that had been lost to time and circumstance decades ago. The faded red leather bore the unmistakable scars of countless training sessions, the laces frayed from being tied and retied by young, eager hands that dreamed of greatness beyond the confines of poverty. Manny's breath caught in his throat as recognition flooded through him. These weren't replicas or similar gloves. These were his actual childhood gloves, the ones his father Rosalio had managed to buy from a second-hand sports shop after months of saving every peso. The memory of that day came rushing back with overwhelming clarity. The pride in his father's eyes, the way the oversized gloves had felt like magic on his small hands, and the promise they represented for a better future. Cristiano watched intently as Manny's eyes filled with tears, understanding that the emotional response confirmed the authenticity of his gift. The Portuguese star began to recount the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment, a quest that had taken nearly 8 months of careful investigation and determination. It had started with a conversation with his longtime friend and former teammate Joaquin, who had connections throughout Southeast Asia and had helped coordinate the search. The trail had begun in General Santos City, where Cristiano's research team, led by his trusted assistant Clarita, had spent weeks interviewing longtime residents and former boxing enthusiasts who remembered the young Manny Pacquiao. They had spoken with Emil, the elderly owner of the original gym where Manny had trained, and discovered that the gloves had been passed down through several hands after Manny outgrew them. The search had led them through a labyrinth of connections, from Tomas, a local boxing memorabilia collector, to Ariel, a former amateur boxer who had purchased the gloves years later, to Marilu, a shop owner in Manila who had acquired them without knowing their significance. Each step of the journey had required delicate negotiations and genuine respect for the cultural importance of preserving Filipino boxing history. The most challenging part of the quest had involved tracking down Teresa, an elderly woman who had kept the gloves in her modest home for over 15 years. She had originally bought them for her grandson, Carlo, who had shown interest in boxing, but eventually pursued other dreams. When Cristiano's team approached her with the story and offered to purchase the gloves, she had initially refused any payment, insisting that such historically significant items should be returned to their rightful owner as a gift. Manny carefully lifted one of the gloves, feeling the weight of memories and dreams within the aged leather. The distinctive smell of old leather mixed with decades-old sweat transported him instantly back to those early days when boxing represented not just a sport, but survival itself. He could almost feel his father's presence in that moment, remembering how Rosario had taught him to care for the gloves, to respect them as tools that could change their family's destiny. The emotional significance extended far beyond the physical object itself. These gloves represented the beginning of everything, the first step in a journey that would eventually lead from the dusty streets of General Santos to world championships, from poverty to prosperity, from obscurity to global recognition. They embodied the pure, unadulterated dreams of a 12-year-old boy who had dared to believe that greatness was possible. Cristiano's own eyes glistened as he witnessed the profound impact of his gift. The months of searching, the careful coordination with local historians and collectors, the delicate negotiations, all of it had been worth this single moment of authentic human connection. He had given Manny more than just a piece of boxing memorabilia. He had returned a piece of the Filipino champion's soul, a tangible link to the boy who had started this incredible journey with nothing but determination and a pair of second-hand gloves. The Manila skyline twinkled beyond them, but both men were lost in the gravity of this extraordinary moment. As Manny held the gloves against his chest, a flood of vivid memories cascaded through his mind like scenes from a forgotten film. He could almost hear his father's gentle voice, explaining how to wrap his hands properly, how to position his stance, and, most importantly, how to fight with honor and respect for his opponent. The weight of those early lessons seemed to emanate from the worn leather, carrying with it the essence of a man who had believed in his son's potential when no one else could see it. The gloves triggered a particularly poignant memory from a sweltering afternoon in 1991. Manny remembered how his father had walked him to the local gym for his first real training session, both of them sharing these very gloves since they couldn't afford a second pair. Rosario would hold pads while wearing work gloves, his weathered hands absorbing the impact of his son's determined punches. The image of his father's encouraging smile, despite their dire financial circumstances, now seemed permanently etched into the leather fibers he held. Cristiano observed the profound transformation taking place before him. The confident world champion had become vulnerable, almost childlike, as decades of carefully constructed emotional barriers crumbled in the presence of this simple yet extraordinary artifact. The Portuguese star understood that he was witnessing something rare, the moment when a man's present success connected directly with the pure dreams of his childhood, unfiltered by fame, money, or external expectations. The story behind these particular gloves held even deeper significance than either man had initially realized. During the research process, Cristiano's team had discovered that Rosario Pacquiao had worked extra shifts as a tricycle driver for 3 months to afford them. The elderly Roberto, who had operated the second-hand sports shop in the 1990s, still remembered the transaction clearly. He recalled how Manny's father had returned to the shop 5 different times, each time checking if the gloves were still available while he saved the necessary funds. Roberto had shared with Cristiano's team how Rosalio had finally arrived with the exact amount in crumpled peso bills, his pride evident despite the obvious financial sacrifice. The shop owner had been so moved by the father's dedication that he had thrown in a pair of hand wraps at no extra charge, a gesture of kindness that had unknowingly contributed to launching one of boxing's greatest careers. The emotional weight of this revelation had driven Cristiano's determination to reunite Manny with this precious piece of his history. The Portuguese superstar recognized that these gloves represented more than athletic equipment. They embodied a father's love, a family's sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that dreams could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Manny's tears began to fall freely as he remembered the last time he had worn these gloves. It was during a regional amateur tournament where he had won his first official victory, a moment that had convinced him that boxing might actually be his path out of poverty. He could still feel the electricity of that crowd, small as it was, cheering for the skinny kid from General Santos, who had refused to stay down despite being knocked to the canvas twice. The gloves had been retired shortly after that tournament, when Manny finally outgrew them, his hands and ambitions both expanding beyond their confines. His father had carefully stored them away, promising that someday they would remember this beginning together. Tragically, Rosalio had passed away before that someday ever arrived, and the gloves had been lost during the family's subsequent moves and struggles. Now, holding them again after nearly 3 decades, Manny felt his father's presence more powerfully than he had since the funeral. The connection transcended the physical realm, creating a bridge between past and present, between the scared 12-year-old boy and the accomplished man he had become. Cristiano remained silent, understanding that this moment belonged entirely to Manny and the memories that these simple leather gloves had unlocked. The emotional intensity of the moment created an almost sacred atmosphere on the penthouse balcony. Manny carefully placed the gloves on his lap, his fingers tracing the familiar contours and worn patches that told the story of countless hours of dedication. Each scuff mark, each faded area of leather, represented dreams that had once seemed impossible for a boy from the impoverished streets of General Santos City. Cristiano found himself deeply moved by witnessing such raw, authentic emotion from a man he had long admired from afar. The Portuguese star realized that his own understanding of struggle and sacrifice paled in comparison to what Manny had endured during his childhood. While Cristiano had faced challenges on his journey to greatness, he had never experienced the kind of crushing poverty that had shaped every aspect of Manny's early life. The silence between them was comfortable and meaningful, filled with unspoken understanding and mutual respect. Cristiano began to share his own reflection on the research process, describing how each conversation with the people who had helped locate the gloves had taught him profound lessons about Filipino culture, family values, and the importance of preserving history. He spoke about Benilda, an elderly woman in General Santos who had spent hours recounting stories about young Manny's determination, and Edgardo, a former boxing trainer who still remembered the skinny kid who would train even when he hadn't eaten all day. These conversations had transformed Cristiano's perspective on his own privileges and responsibilities. Meeting Luz Viminda, a local historian who had helped document early Filipino boxing history, had shown him how deeply sports could be woven into a community's identity and hope. The Portuguese superstar had begun to understand that his gift to Manny was also a gift to an entire culture that had supported and celebrated their champion's remarkable journey. Manny's thoughts drifted to his wife Jinky and their children, imagining how they would react to seeing these gloves. He thought about how Jimuel, who had shown interest in boxing himself, would be able to hold the very gloves that had started their family's transformation from poverty to prosperity. The connection between generations suddenly felt tangible and precious, a physical link between past struggles and present blessings. The weight of responsibility that both men carried became a topic of unspoken connection. Cristiano understood the pressure of representing not just himself but an entire nation's hopes and dreams. Similarly, Manny had always carried the expectations of the Filipino people, knowing that his success brought joy and pride to millions who saw their own potential reflected in his achievements. As the evening air grew cooler, Manny began to process the extraordinary effort that Cristiano had invested in this gesture. The months of research, the careful coordination with dozens of people across the Philippines, The cultural sensitivity required to navigate such a personal quest, all of it demonstrated a level of friendship and respect that transcended typical celebrity relationships. Cristiano reflected on how this experience had changed his own approach to giving and friendship. He realized that the most meaningful gifts weren't expensive items or luxurious experiences, but rather connections to authentic moments and cherished memories. The joy he felt from witnessing Manny's emotional response far exceeded any satisfaction he had ever derived from personal achievements or accolades. The gloves seemed to have transformed the entire evening from a pleasant dinner between two successful athletes into something far more profound, a moment of genuine human connection that would bond them permanently. Both men understood that they had shared something rare and precious, an experience that would influence how they approached relationships and priorities for the rest of their lives. Manny looked up at Cristiano with eyes still glistening with tears, feeling overwhelmed by gratitude, not just for the gift itself, but for the reminder of his father's love and the validation that his journey had inspired others in ways he had never imagined. The boy who had once worn these gloves while dreaming of a better life could never have envisioned this extraordinary moment of recognition and friendship. As the emotional intensity of the moment began to settle into a warm, lasting connection, both men found themselves contemplating the broader implications of what had just transpired. Manny carefully placed the gloves back in their protective wrapping, but kept them close, unwilling to let this tangible piece of his history drift too far from his reach. The gesture had awakened something within him, a renewed appreciation for the journey that had brought him from those humble beginnings to this extraordinary moment of friendship. Cristiano observed the transformation in Manny's demeanor, noting how the initial shock had evolved into a deep, contemplative gratitude. The Portuguese star began to understand that his gift had accomplished something beyond his original intentions. He had not merely returned a piece of memorabilia, he had helped heal a wound that Manny had carried for decades. The pain of losing physical connections to his father and the early struggles that had shaped his character. The conversation naturally shifted toward their shared experiences as fathers and role models. Manny found himself thinking about the stories he would now be able to tell his children, particularly Jimuel, who had often asked about his grandfather's influence on his boxing career. These gloves would provide a tangible way to share those memories, to help his children understand the sacrifice and determination that had created the foundation for their current, comfortable life. Cristiano shared his own reflections on legacy and the responsibility that came with global influence. The process of searching for Manny's gloves had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of preserving history and honoring the struggles that preceded success. He spoke about his recent conversations with Josefina, his childhood friend's mother, who had reminded him that true greatness was measured not by personal achievements, but by the positive impact one could have on others' lives. The evening had also sparked new ideas for both men regarding their philanthropic efforts. Manny began to envision a project that would preserve the stories and artifacts of other Filipino athletes who had overcome poverty to achieve success. He imagined creating a museum or cultural center that would inspire young people by showing them that extraordinary achievements could emerge from the most challenging circumstances. Cristiano found himself inspired by the depth of connection he had witnessed throughout the Philippines during his research. The warmth and generosity of people like Amihan, a local community leader who had volunteered countless hours to help locate information, had shown him the power of collective effort in preserving cultural memory. He began to consider how he might apply similar approaches to projects in Portugal and other countries where he had influence. The impact of the evening extended beyond their individual reflections to encompass their growing friendship. Both men recognized that they had shared something authentic and meaningful, a connection that transcended the superficial relationships often formed between celebrities. The mutual respect they had felt from their first meeting had deepened into genuine affection and understanding. Manny thought about the photograph he would take with these gloves, not for publicity or social media, but for his personal collection, a private reminder of this incredible gesture and the friendship it represented. He envisioned showing the gloves to his mother, Dionysia, knowing that she would understand immediately the emotional significance of their return and the extraordinary effort that Cristiano had invested in making it happen. The Manila skyline continued to twinkle beyond them, but both men were now lost in contemplation of how this evening would influence their future decisions and priorities. The simple act of returning a pair of childhood boxing gloves had created ripple effects that would extend far beyond this single moment, touching their families, their philanthropic work, and their understanding of what it meant to use success as a platform for meaningful connection. Cristiano realized that he had received far more than he had given. Witnessing Manny's emotional response had reminded him of why he had fallen in love with sports in the first place, not for the fame or financial rewards, but for the pure joy of pursuing dreams and the connections formed along the journey. As the evening progressed toward its natural conclusion, both men found themselves reluctant to end what had become a transformative experience. The simple act of sharing a meal had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a profound exploration of purpose, legacy, and the unexpected ways that lives could intersect to create lasting meaning. The gloves continued to rest between them, serving as a silent reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment of genuine connection. Manny began to formulate concrete plans for honoring not just the gift itself, but the spirit behind Cristiano's extraordinary gesture. He envisioned creating a scholarship program specifically designed to support young Filipino athletes from impoverished backgrounds, ensuring that financial barriers would never prevent talented individuals from pursuing their dreams. The program would be named in honor of his father Rosalio, incorporating the values of perseverance and dignity that these rediscovered gloves represented. Cristiano found himself inspired to expand his own philanthropic efforts beyond traditional boundaries. The research process that had led to finding Manny's gloves had introduced him to remarkable individuals throughout the Philippines who had dedicated their lives to preserving cultural heritage and supporting their communities. He began to consider how his global platform could be used to highlight such unsung heroes, people like Noel, the retired teacher who had spent his own savings to maintain a small boxing gym for neighborhood children. The conversation turned to their shared understanding of the isolation that often accompanied extreme success. Both men had experienced the peculiar loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people, yet feeling truly understood by very few. Tonight had provided them with something rare, authentic connection with someone who genuinely comprehended the unique pressures and responsibilities they carried. Manny reflected on how this evening would influence his approach to relationships and success. The depth of research and cultural sensitivity that Cristiano had demonstrated in locating the gloves had shown him a new standard for meaningful friendship. It had reminded him that true connection required investment, patience, and genuine interest in understanding another person's journey. The Portuguese star contemplated how the entire experience had shifted his perspective on giving and receiving. Throughout his career, he had participated in numerous charitable events and made significant financial contributions to various causes. However, witnessing Manny's emotional response had taught him that the most valuable gifts often required time, thought, and personal investment rather than simply monetary resources. As they prepared to conclude their evening together, both men recognized that they had established the foundation for a lasting friendship that would extend far beyond their athletic careers. They discussed potential future collaborations, including the possibility of joint philanthropic projects that could combine their different cultural perspectives and global reach to create meaningful change. Manny carefully gathered the gloves, understanding that he was taking home more than just a piece of his personal history. He was carrying with him a renewed sense of purpose and a reminder that success without meaningful connection was ultimately hollow. The evening had rekindled his appreciation for the journey that had brought him from poverty to prominence, while also inspiring him to ensure that his legacy would extend beyond boxing achievements. Cristiano felt a deep satisfaction knowing that his months of effort had created something beautiful and lasting. The gesture had required significant time and resources, but the emotional reward of witnessing Manny's joy far exceeded any personal satisfaction he had ever derived from individual accolades or victories. The city lights of Manila stretched endlessly before them, as both men understood that this night would remain etched in their memories as a defining moment of authentic human connection. They had discovered that true friendship could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances, creating bonds that transcended cultural differences and geographic distances. As the clock approached midnight, the magical evening drew to its inevitable close, but neither man felt ready to break the spell that had been cast over their extraordinary encounter. The gloves now rested securely in a custom protective case that Cristiano had also prepared, ensuring that this precious piece of history would be preserved for future generations. The case itself bore a simple but elegant inscription in both English and Filipino, commemorating not just the gloves, but the friendship that had been forged through their return. Manny stood slowly, cradling the case against his chest like a parent holding a sleeping child. The weight of the gloves seemed to anchor him to a sense of purpose and gratitude that would influence every decision he made moving forward. He understood that he was not just taking home a piece of his past, but carrying with him a renewed commitment to honoring the sacrifices that had made his success possible. The embrace they shared before parting lasted longer than typical celebrity farewells, conveying the depth of respect and affection that had developed throughout their time together. Cristiano felt a profound sense of completion, knowing that his gesture had accomplished something far beyond what he had originally envisioned. He had not merely returned lost property, he had helped heal old wounds and create new possibilities for meaningful connection. As Manny made his way toward the elevator, accompanied by the faithful Bayani, he turned back one final time to see Cristiano standing on the balcony, silhouetted against the Manila skyline. The image would remain permanently etched in his memory, a reminder of how unexpected friendships could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances and create extraordinary moments of human connection. The ride down to the lobby passed in contemplative silence, Manny's mind already racing with plans for sharing this experience with his family. He imagined the moment when he would show the gloves to his children, explaining not just their historical significance, but the incredible gesture of friendship that had made their return possible. The stories he would tell would emphasize the importance of kindness, cultural respect, and the power of meaningful relationships. Cristiano remained on the balcony long after Manny's departure, reflecting on how profoundly the evening had affected his own perspective on success and relationships. The months of research and planning had taught him valuable lessons about Filipino culture, family values, and the importance of preserving personal history. More importantly, the experience had reminded him that the most rewarding achievements often involved enriching other people's lives rather than pursuing personal glory. The following weeks would see both men implementing the ideas and commitments that had emerged from their evening together. Manny would establish the Pacquiao Foundation, providing scholarships and boxing equipment to underprivileged youth throughout the Philippines. Cristiano would expand his charitable work to include cultural preservation projects, working with communities to document and protect their athletic heritage. Their friendship would continue to flourish across continents and time zones, sustained by regular communication and occasional visits. They would collaborate on joint philanthropic initiatives, combining their global influence to create positive change in communities around the world. The gloves would eventually be displayed in a place of honor in Manny's home, but their true value lay in the connection they had facilitated and the ongoing friendship they represented. Years later, both men would look back on this evening as a turning point, a moment when two successful athletes discovered that their greatest achievements lay not in personal accomplishments, but in the authentic connections they could forge and the positive impact they could have on each other's lives. Thank you for watching another episode of Champions Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.